Yay! Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Oh, look, Suzanne, it's your mom. You can peek in and say hi. Hi, everyone. Hi, Margie. Liz. Hey, Gabe. Holly. Hi, everybody. Lexa. Hey, Hannah. Hey, Will. Congratulations on engagement.
Thank you.
Hi. As everyone gets settled, feel free to start drinking your wine. By no means do you need to wait to do that while we wait for everyone to join and get settled in. Hi, Beth. Hi, Pat. Hi, Benedict. Oh, I'm so glad you're
Hi.
here.
Cheers.
Cheers. Hi.
Shannon.
You.
Hey.
Cheers.
Oh, hey.
Hi, Pat.
I don't know that we are on. Make a Zoom.
Here. Oh, there we are.
Cheers.
Hi, Khaled Nazgul. Hi, Khaled. All right. Welcome, everybody. We'll give it a couple more minutes.
Hi, Yesiju.
While you guys are settling in, feel free to drink in any order you want. We have 3 wines that we're tasting together, but of course, if you don't have them, not to worry. If you do have the wines that we're tasting, we're going to be tasting first through the Escalada de Sil, second through the Antigua Clásico Rioja, and third through the Caro. But there's no real order. This is going to be fun and casual, but just recommended. Hi, Liz. Hi, everyone.
Hi. So excited. Oh, do you know, can I use a Coravin on like multiple bottles or no?
Yeah, you can use a Coravin on as many bottles as you like.
Put it in.
As long as there's argon gas in the capsule, you're good to go.
Okay.
Also, if you have pizza, I'm going to start serving myself my pizza. I see some people have already gotten started, but I'd love to see where did people order from? Feel free to throw it in the chat or tell me. I'm curious.
I made it.
Oh, nice. We're going to take a few polls in a little bit. So one of them is, I'm curious to see how many people made pizza. Kudos to you. Hi, Andre.
58? 4.
Pizza secret, yes. All right, I'm gonna pour some of my wines.
Yeah, I can see, but I can't.
So we've got over 150 tickets to this event tonight. So I'm still letting people in, although we can start in just a minute. Yasmin, I'll say the word in a moment here.
For those who are still joining in, you guys are going to be on mute for the session, but feel free to unmute if you have a question, or you can throw it in the chat. You're going to see some fun polls coming, and feel free to, if you post the photos, tag us, tag the place where you got your pizza. We're going to record this so that if you ever want to go back to her, if someone you know wanted to listen in and couldn't join, they can always go on our YouTube channel and see all the recording. Perfect. Hey, Charles. Hi, Jay.
Happy New Year, Yasmin.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Vermont pizza, represent. Hi, Jen.
All right. Well, it's 5 after. Maybe we can set this up a little bit and get rolling once everybody else feels ready. So a lot of people have already used the chat box, which is great. My name is Erin. I work with Yasmin. Both of us represent Ole No Brigado. which is an importer of Spanish and Portuguese wines from small family producers all over the Iberian Peninsula. And we're so happy that we started this series. We're so happy that you're here. So for those of you who maybe this is your first time joining us, we started a food and wine pairing series in September. So this is our 5th one. And all of this is about 2 things. 1, making food and wine accessible and fun and approachable. And 2, raising funds and giving back. So we're here to support some really important causes. Every month we've got a different beneficiary nonprofit that we work with. And we're very fortunate to have one on tonight, but Yasmin will introduce our guests, our guest hosts in just a sec. I am here to help answer questions, make sure everyone's having a good experience from the technology side. So if you need something or you have a question, whether it's about the content or what we're doing, put it in the box. This is about an hour-long session, and really the focus is on food and wine pairing. So we're going to launch some polls that you can answer just to get a sense of what everybody's up to, what you've got in front of you tonight, and all that good stuff. The wine order, we're going to talk about the wines. Yasmin and Vanessa will talk about the wines in the order of Escalada do Sil, and then La Antigua Clásico Crianza, and then Caro Tinto. So if you are wanting to taste along, that's the order we're going to taste in. And a lot of people are going to probably have burning questions about pizza in the general sense for Scott. Once you hear him talk about pizza, we will we'll stay on at the end and leave this session open if you want to for him the questions about pizza in general. So for the hour we're together, we're going to talk about the food and wine pairing side of it. And then at the end, if you guys want to hang out and keep talking pizza, we're going to leave that open and you'll be able to unmute yourselves and do all that good stuff. But once again, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining this series. We were able to raise over $150,000 for nonprofits, really important causes in 2020, over $700,000 in the lifetime of Ole and Obrigado for great causes, and we hope to do more, so we hope you'll join us again after. But with that, I hand it over to our host, Yasmin, and hope you guys have a great time. I've got my pizza and my wine, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, cheers everybody. Welcome. Thank you guys so much for your support. We smashed records tonight. We sold 150 tickets. The last most popular event was, I think, what was it, Aaron? 135 tickets. So thank you all so much for showing up and supporting. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Yasmin Deaver. I run business development at Ole and Obrigado. This is now the 5th episode of our food and wine pairing series. And really it's an initiative that's near and dear to us. You know, one of the things that I love about working for this company is giving back really is such a core part of the ethos of our company. And so we do a lot of things like this, and this is our opportunity to give back. And it's a great platform for us, not just to give back to our producers and our trade partners, but also, you know, teach you all about food and wine pairing and to give back and bring attention to causes that maybe aren't always related to wine, but just make the world a better place. So thank you all for being here. And yeah, this is a really proud part of what we do. We've donated almost $700,000 as a company since we were founded, and this is what gives kind of meaning to what we do. So I'm really excited to be here, and thank you all so much for joining us. So with that, let me go into just telling you a little bit more about tonight. So I pretty much, since we first decided on creating this series, was excited about this night. I wanted to do pizza. Pizza is my favorite food, and I figured it would just be fun to pair wines with something we eat every day. And so really no better people to have on our panel than our 2 guests tonight. We have Vanessa Price. She's the founder of the Vinum Collective, and she is the author of my current favorite wine read called Big Macs in Burgundy. Shameless plug. I've been reading it since I was here, but I'm obsessed with this book. And she really just nails it in terms of making wine really approachable and fun. So that's the goal for tonight. And then we have Scott Wiener. He is the founder of Slice Out Hunger. And this is an organization that was a perfect fit for tonight. I found out about it through one of my favorite pizza chefs, Matt Hyland of Emmy Squared. And they're dedicated. For me, what's exciting is supporting people who leverage their passions for a good cause, and that's what Scott's done. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Scott to just tell us a little bit more about Slice Out Hunger and the reason why we're here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here and honored that you chose Slice Out Hunger as a beneficiary for tonight. As you know, and as Erin mentioned before, I love talking about pizza. Could talk about it for hours would be an understatement. It's my job to talk about pizza. So, well, I'll stick around later and we can get into real deep pizza chat. But right now, I really want to explain to you what Slice Out Hunger is and how Slice Out Hunger grew out of my personal obsession with pizza, but also the desire of a lot of people in the pizza world to give back to their communities. Because I became obsessed with pizza the way that anybody else did. Eating pizza as a kid is like just the greatest feeling and a thing you look forward to. And as a grown up, it feels exactly the same. And I remembered back when I was a kid, the pizzerias were always giving back to the community. They were sponsoring the Little League team. And, my friends who were on the Tony's Pizza team were like, they had the coolest shirts for the Little League team. And I was jealous because I didn't have that. But it always was this community vibe. And when I started my business in 2008, which is a tour company, we do tours of famous pizzerias in New York City. I knew that I wanted to make part of what we do a community-oriented give back. And we started to do an annual event in Manhattan where we got pizzerias to donate their food. And then we sold that food for $1 per slice. And then we found a sponsor to match every dollar we raised. And we sent the money to a different hunger relief organization every year. And that grew. And by 2015, we were raising tens of thousands of dollars in a single night just by selling donated pizza. So we became a 501c3. To this day, we've raised over $1 million. The money that we raise all goes back to the community, and not just in New York. Now we're nationwide. And we have a volunteer crew who currently, for the past 10 months or so, we've been doing a campaign called Pizza versus Pandemic, where we raise money and we use that funds to sponsor purchases of pizza from independent pizzerias to be delivered to hunger relief organizations, frontline healthcare workers, hospitals. I mean, you name it. We've raised and spent about $700,000 in the past 10 months. And we're continuing to do that. And the funds that are raised from this event tonight will go toward Pizza versus Pandemic, where unfortunately we still have a long road ahead of us, where we're gonna have to really support our neighbors, and then a much longer road after, where hunger relief has become an even more important story, and the pizza community really gets behind it. So I'm here representing the pizza community, and people ask me all the time, what do you pair as a beverage with pizza? And if you know what you're doing, the wine is the thing. And that's why I'm really excited to be here, because Vanessa's going to help me answer that question to people when they ask me. And I might just say, well, ask Vanessa, but hopefully I can shield you from some of those emails with what I learned tonight. So thank you all for being here and supporting us. Anybody who has questions about Slice Out Hunger, you can just go to sliceouthunger.org. You can email me through that. Slice Out Hunger on all social media. And of course, I'll be here hanging out to chat about pizza until the wine is gone.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Scott. So with that, we'll transition into, I'll introduce Vanessa. For me, a big passion of mine in general is making wine more approachable and fun. And I was so excited reading Vanessa's book and connecting with her, because she really is kind of like we have so much in common in that sense, that she's really dedicated this book and what she's doing to taking the snobbery out of wine, which I love. I feel like wine is this really daunting topic, and it doesn't need to be. And so it's people like Vanessa that, for me, are moving our whole industry ahead in that respect. So without further ado, Vanessa, I'll kind of turn it over to you to maybe give us just some insight into your approach to food and wine pairing, and maybe a little 101, and kind of just like how to break it down, some pearls of wisdom.
Sure. Thank you so much to Ole and Obrigado for having me here. This is a really special thing to be a part of, especially with Slice Out Hunger as the partner for it. And I guess thanks to everyone who showed up to listen to me him and haw for a bit. So that's always amusing for me. So I guess, really the whole point of having written the book, I don't know if any of you folks have had a chance to read it or hear about it or not, but really the idea behind it is that we kind of reserve wine in this space that's like, we think white tablecloth, we think, fancy food. We tend to, or at least this tends to be the way that we think about wine. And really, it shouldn't just live in, that's a beautiful space for it to live. I'm never, you want to take me for lunch at Le Bernardin, I'm never going to say no, but certainly that's not the only place that wine should live, right? Look at where we all are. We're all at home and have been for some time now, and wine should be living there as well, right? And the foods that we get, whether it's the homemade foods or it's the takeout, or it's your favorite family dish from if you're maybe from here, if you immigrated and brought those culinary cultural traditions with you. There's a place for wine with all of those types of food. So that's what the book Big Macs in Burgundy sort of came out of. And actually, one of the very first pairings in the book is a pizza pairing. And in the book, I did an Italian wine. But there is certainly, as I sort of go into in the book, there are many wines that can pair with different foods. That's why when you usually sit down to think about what you're going to eat and what you're going to drink, the idea is you pick your food and then you pick your wine, because it's not as limiting as if you pick your wine first. So unless you're a big wino, and then you look at the wine list and then decide what you're going to eat based on the wine you decided to drink. But when it comes to food and wine pairing, the same principles that apply for, sous vide pheasant loins with the dusting of lavender Anjou is the same principles that apply for pizza or Cheetos or burgers or whatever it may be, right? Because ultimately, how our perception works from a physiological perspective, it's the same, right? So when you talk about wine, there are four main elements. There's sugar, tannin, acid, and alcohol, okay? Of course, when you hear someone describe a wine and they say, notes of dried rose petals and, freshly tilled earth with an undercurrent of dried black currants and a long, robust tannic influx, it's like, okay, yeah, sure. I just described maybe a Barolo or something, but that's the Sistine Chapel, right? You need the four walls that built it in order to be able to get to that sort of, tantamount sort of description. So when we talk about wine, the most relevant thing in terms of thinking about food and in terms of communicating with other people is these four elements: sugar, tannin, acid, and alcohol. So in our mouth, we perceive these elements in pretty specific ways, right? All over our mouth, we're sort of getting, because if you think about it, like I don't mean to be gross, but like all of this, all inside there, it's all data. All of those fleshy bits are giving you data, right? So when you coat your mouth has a physiological reaction. For sugar, it tends to happen towards the front of your mouth, and that's because in your mouth you actually have 1, 2, 3 sets of nerve endings. And so that's why when you hear people talk about wine, they talk about the attack, the mid palate, and the finish. And that's because it's actually 3 different distinct set of nerve endings that are reacting to the wine or whatever else it might be that when it comes to your mouth. So for sugar, and we're talking about wine specifically, it tends to light up on the attack. It tends to brighten up the front of your mouth and leave sort of an oiliness moving through the rest of it, right? But we're all pretty familiar with what sweetness is. We recognize it when we taste it. I'm sure most of us like sugar. The second one, which is a bit more obvious, is alcohol. Alcohol is something that we perceive 2 different ways. The first, we perceive it as if it's higher in alcohol, we can perceive it as heat. Right. So from an extreme perspective, if you think about a tequila shot, right? Think about how a tequila shot burns all the way down, right? That's you reacting to the high alcohol that's in the tequila shot. Now, wine doesn't have alcohol that's that high, but when an alcohol is higher, we can register it as a temperature, that heat, that warming feeling. The other way that we feel alcohol is actually directly correlated to body. So because the 2 liquids that make up wine, one being ethanol and one being water, they're 2 different densities, which means they have 2 different viscosities. To give an example of viscosity that feels a bit, on the extreme side, but to sort of paint the picture, if you think about milk versus maple syrup. Maple syrup is very viscous. Milk is not very viscous. Okay, so a wine that is higher in alcohol is going to be more viscous. And the way we sort of translate that is saying the wine will have more body. So that's why when you look at, if you turn over and you look at the back label, sometimes it's on the front label and it tells you the alcohol by volume. It's actually not just telling you the alcohol, it's also telling you a rough estimation of what the body of the wine will be. So the lower the alcohol of the wine, the lighter the body will be. The higher the alcohol of the wine, the fuller the body will be. Now, obviously, that makes a difference for the types of food, right? You think about lighter foods versus heavier foods. You want that sort of correlation to follow through in the wines that you're drinking. The third element of wine is acid. So acid is something that we feel two very specific ways. And I'm assuming I've got everybody on the gallery view. So like a show of hands, if you've traveled to a wine country anywhere in the world, whether it's Spain, Portugal, Napa. Oh yeah, lots of hands. Cool. Oh, I love it. So we're probably all a bit more attuned to acidity than someone who maybe prefers beer or prefers a spirit might be. But acidity is really key to food and wine pairing. And we feel it two ways. The first is that tingly sort of feeling that you can get on the sides of your palate. It's a little bit like Liberace going ding, 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 up and down the sides of your palate, right? If I asked you to imagine, if you closed your eyes and you held out your hand and I put a super sour lemon wedge in your hand and I said, okay, take a big old bite out of that lemon wedge. We can all sort of imagine, maybe you're having a physical reaction to it, just thinking about that amount of acidity, right? And that's because it's your body preparing to, absorb all of the acid that's about to come rushing into your palate. The second way that we feel it, and this is something that's really great when you get a food and wine pairing right, is because the higher the acidity of the wine, the harder your palate has to work to find equilibrium again. So just the same way your lungs, you breathe in and out and you don't think about it, your heart beats and you don't think about it. The same thing is happening in your palate. Your palate is constantly working to keep you at equilibrium. So when you have something that has a lot of acidity, you begin to salivate a lot. And that's because your body is pushing all of the saliva into your mouth to dilute the high amount of acid that you had in your mouth. Now, if you just had a really tasty bite of pizza and a really delicious bite of Rioja or whatever, the wine may be, and you swallow that down, the presence of the acidity allows those delicious, yummy flavors to continue to linger. So that's, so the longer the finish, usually the higher the acidity. There are mitigating factors to that, but that's an easy rule of thumb. And it's something that's really, really key to food and wine pairing. The fourth is tannin. And this is one where I think it can get a bit wonky. I'd love to see in the comment section, can anybody tell me what tannin is? Or if you have a really brave soul out there that wants to unmute and tell me what tannin is.
Benedict, I know you know. Calling you out.
I actually don't, so I'm not a scientist, so I'm afraid I don't.
I think between the four of us, we could probably handle it over here.
Okay, let's hear it.
I guess it's the element in the wine that gives rise to that drying sensation.
Well, that's what it does, but what is it?
Isn't it There's a chemical name. It's like a protein that binds to your tongue. It binds to certain receptors on your palate. Which is what produces the drying effect. But I forget the name. I think it's like acetyl something, but I can't quite remember that name.
You're pretty close. A lot of folks sort of dance around it. So where it comes from the stems of a grape, the seeds of a grape, the skins of a grape. It can also come from oak barrels. And what it is a type of polyphenol. And that polyphenol's sole existence in life is to find protein and bond with it. We have protein in our saliva in trace amounts. So when we drink a tannic wine, a wine that has any sort of tannic inflection to it, what happens is the tannin in the wine bonds with the protein in your saliva. And when you swallow, it pulls all that moisture from your mouth. And that's why you get that drying feeling. But if you take that same tannic wine and you pair it with anything that's a greater source of protein than the trace amounts of your saliva. So, it could be a bowl of quinoa, it could be a rack of lamb, it could be a sausage pizza, all of these things have a higher source of protein. What happens is the tannin in the wine will bond with the protein of the food. And when you swallow, you're left with all the yummy flavor bits instead of just that maybe less than pleasant drying feeling, depending. Some people like the bitter dryness more than others. So it depends on your own personal threshold. But tannin is really important. Tannin and acidity are both really important for different food and wine pairings. But bravo, that was a lot closer than most people come. So Yasmin, should we talk about what's that?
Nicholas got it in the chat. He beat me to it and I couldn't quite see the screen.
Oh, I didn't see. Tannins are bitter particles, polyphenols. Boom, there we go. We've got some pros up in here. So Yasmin, should we talk about the first wine?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me kind of guide you guys through the first wine. This is my first time using. I'm going to try and put a map in my background. And I experimented with this earlier and realized I could never be a weather woman. Because I have to do everything in reverse, apparently, which is what weather people do. So the first wine we're tasting is Escalada do Sil. So this one here is all the way in the northwestern part of Spain, just to kind of give you guys a sense. I'll move aside so you can see it on the map. But as you can tell, it's pretty much just above north of Portugal. It's in a region called Galicia. This is a region of Spain that's relatively cooler climate because you have the cooling influence from the Atlantic Ocean. So what happens is you end up with wines that have this really nice signature freshness and lift to them. And what I mean by lift is, it's really light on its feet and it almost kind of jumps off your palate if you happen to have this wine and you take a sip of it. And the other thing that's really interesting about wines from this region is that they're at altitude. They're kind of steep, hilly slopes where this wine comes from, and this it's relatively cool, but more importantly, there's large temperature variations between daytime and nighttime. And so as a result, what happens is the grapes can ripen during the day, but at night they can retain the acidity. And so that's the perfect recipe for a slower ripening of grapes, similar to if you were to make a braised short rib, low and slow, right? Like you develop more complex, nuanced flavors, and the same applies true to wine. So if you happen to have this in your glass and you smell it, one of the things for me that's a marker of red wines from Galicia, from this broader region, is the wines tend to be really beautifully perfumed and aromatic. And that's kind of one major marker of wines from this region for me. The other thing is, and this is a blend. It's a blend of local varieties. Menançao is about 50% of this grape, which is Trousseau and Jura, if anyone's ever tasted wines from that part of France. And there's also some Mencia and Garnacha Tintorera. This wine for me, I like to guide people to wines from this region, red wines from this region, who like Pinot Noir or wines from red Burgundy. It's a really great option if you're looking to kind of explore into lesser known territory. This happens to be one of the first wines that I fell in love with when I was working at Sotheby's, and I ended up deciding to work full time for Olena Brigada. This is one of the wines that I fell totally in love with. I feel like sometimes I like to play a fun game with wines. If people have done tastings with me know that I love to describe the wines as if they were people. So fun experiment. I know not everyone's tasting the same wines, but I always like to get in the habit of, like, it's just a fun game to play because I feel like it levels the playing field in terms of your wine knowledge and your vocabulary. And so just a fun game. As you're tasting through these wines, smell them and try to gauge, like, describe it as if it was a person. Like for me, this wine evokes for me Audrey Hepburn. It's really, really perfumed, and it's elegant and delicate and so classy. And so I guess, like, bigger takeaways that I want to leave you with is wines from this region are really great if you're looking to explore elsewhere and you like fresher, lighter, brighter wines, Beaujolais, Pinot Noir, And I really want to call out for this producer, who also happens to be a co-founder of our company, Alberto Orte. He is such an interesting character. I describe him as kind of a anthropologist, come historian, come winemaker. He's all about really bringing back older methods of winemaking and resuscitating vineyards that have been lost to modernity and winemaking techniques that have been lost to modernity. So this particular wine, for me, it's in a region that's not exactly accessible. It's a bit treacherous. So it's really a labor of love. And just to give you an idea, like, there's only about 625 cases of this wine produced. And to put things in perspective, if anyone knows, Burgundy is the most expensive red wine in the world and the rarest. And just to give you a sense for how small the production is, we're talking about Demendola Romane Conti. They're the most expensive wine in the world. Romane Conti, that's rare, is about a little over 900 cases, 6-packs is their annual production, and this one's 625. So it just gives you a sense, like, these wines really are a labor of love. And if you haven't had a chance to taste tonight, I would highly encourage you to seek them out. But yeah, Alberto Orte's MO is really wines with freshness and elegance and beautiful aromatic intensity. So that's kind of the first one. I'm trying to think if there's any other takeaways I want to leave you for Delicia. I think that's it. If you are a Pinot Noir person, I think these are a great category to explore. So
we've had a couple of comments about the delicate and perfumed nature of the wine, and I'd love to hear Vanessa and Yasmin talk about like light wines with strong flavors like pepperoni, tomato, cheese.
Yeah. So
please go ahead. Please go.
I've been talking a lot. I'll give it to you. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, well, that's a great comment, because for me, this is a like a classic margarita pizza wine. I wouldn't actually put any sort of like protein on top of it. I think that just, the classic marinara, the fattiness of the cheese, that's all you really want, because the bright red fruit flavors of this, the sort of tingling acidity, the not light body, but medium minus sort of body of the wine, like they really need something that's like fresh and sort of uplifting the same way. I specifically think about it being like the Napolitan, like super, light. It's almost, you could eat a whole pie and you're like, I could eat a whole nother one because it was so light, and I think the wine has that same sort of lift to it. Because there are 1,000 different caveats and a million different ways that you could categorize. You could do this food with that wine, but one of the easiest things to think about is like with like, right? So a light bodied wine would go with a lighter style of pizza. A red fruit driven wine would go with, really classic marinara, very simply seasoned with a little salt, to sort of brighten it up, maybe a little bit of oregano. So that's where I would go.
So when I think about, like, when I approach pairings with like pizza more specifically, because that's what we're really here for tonight, I like to think about, so there's two categories of in terms of your approach to pairings that when I think about, and there's congruent pairings and complementary. And for me, this wine is perfect example of a complementary pairing. So two elements that are different that come together to create combine to create new flavors. And to me, that's what really defines a great pairing, is two parts, for the sum of which are greater than the whole. And they kind of amplify flavors. Like, when I think about good pairings, if you have a good pairing, it's a good pairing, because I know this is a kind of weird visual, but I think about good food and wine pairings. It's almost like a slip and slide, where it serves to just like extend and amplify and add to the flavor. So like when they come together, it's a whole new level of flavor. And for me, this wine, Escalado do Sil, has this really nice red fruit and floral element, and that contrast really nicely with savory flavors like pepperoni, for example. Like, for me, pepperoni pizza with Escalado do Sil is probably one of my favorite wine pairings of all time. And that's a perfect example of a contrasting pairing. as we go along to some of the other wines, because I think actually the second wine that I was going to talk about is a great example of more similar flavors that combine to create a great pairing. So I guess with that, I'll talk just really briefly about the second wine that you guys are tasting. So the second wine here, I'm going to switch my background a little and show you guys where we are. Okay, so the second wine we're tasting, it's called La Antigua Clásico, and it's actually also by Alberto Orte, the same producer, and it refers to an old style of wine. And again, this kind of plays into the theme that I was telling you about in terms of his MO of really bringing back and reviving older methods, more traditional methods of winemaking. So Rioja, stuff that I really want you guys to remember, because obviously I'm really geeky and dorky about all this stuff, but I realize you guys aren't, like, you're gonna only remember so much. Rioja is probably one of the most well-known regions. Raise of hands, has anyone who's had Rioja before or knows of Rioja? Yeah, like, see, which is pretty, you know, it's one of the most well-known regions. Rioja is kind of in the north central part of Spain. I'll try to move aside so you guys can see. And even though Rioja is pretty famous and well-known, this particular region within Rioja is it's pretty off the beaten path and undiscovered. This is a region called Sierra de la Demanda. It's higher altitude, so it's relatively cooler. And this was a region that was where there were tons of vineyards before. If you go to now, it's pretty scattered. It's not an easy place to grow wine. And everything has to be hand harvested and done by hand. And again, this is kind of like the beauty of what Alberto's doing, is he's finding these old vines with incredible potential. And I don't know, I think this is part of what drove me to work in this industry, is to help bring light to and support people who are really doing things out of pure passion. Like, this is not a money-making endeavor. And for me, you know, it's for me, that's what gives me the most joy, I guess, when I'm talking about wines. This Rioja, stuff that I want you to remember, it's known for a grape called Tempranillo. These wines tend to be relatively medium to bigger bodied and relatively higher in tannins, although it depends, like, there is some variation in style. And stuff that you'll remember on the label, you might see a designation, a classification, and you'll see on the label, if you have the Antigua Clásico, that it says Crianza. So that refers to the classifications, which are they indicate the aging requirements. So you might notice on the bottle, it may say Joven or just Rioja, at Crianza, Reserva, Gran Reserva. And those are all indicative and classified based on how long they're required to age them. So for Crianza, it's only required to age for 2 years, 1 year in bottle, 1 year in oak, 1 year in bottle. This one's actually double that. It's been aged 4 years before release. So now you know, if you didn't know before, what those designations mean. I'm trying to think of other takeaways that I want to leave with you. I mentioned that this is higher altitude. Some Riojas tend to be kind of more robust, bigger bodies. If you taste this one, this is kind of a different, more unique style. It's really fresh, and that's because it's from a higher altitude. And why that matters, why does it matter if a wine's from a higher altitude, is because it's cooler. And again, you go back to the same thing I was talking about before, where you have larger temperature variation between day and night. So you end up with wines that have this really nice freshness and lift and elegance and aromatic intensity to them, which is his MO. But for me, this wine I love with sausage fennel flavors. It goes really well with savory herbal foods and paprika. If anyone is in their kitchen, I dare you, go find the paprika spice from your spice cabinet and honestly just like sprinkle it on your pizza and try it with this wine. It's kind of odd. Paprika goes really, really well with these wines. But generally speaking, I find wines from this region tend to have this really nice, like, savory, almost dusty quality to them. And for me, yeah, I'm curious what Aaron and Vanessa or anyone else, what pizza you're eating, if anyone has this wine, kind of what works.
So Yasmin, if I could interject, one thing that I would say that's really interesting about this wine that's a bit unusual, for any folks that are big on Rioja or have maybe visited it, you know, the two main grapes that you typically think of are Tempranillo and Garnacha. But this one actually has a very large percentage of another grape, which a lot of people may or may not have heard of, which is called Graciano or Graciano. And this is a wine, or a grape, I should say, that has typically played a very small role. You know, it's sort of like the little tiny fiddle in the background, sort of grape, but with I'm not trying to be political in saying this, but with the changing of the climate of the world, you know, wine regions are getting warmer, and winemakers and wine growers are having to make decisions about, you know, are they going to, because they basically have two choices, right? Especially in areas that were already traditionally warmer. They could either say, all right, I'm just going to do more manipulations in the winery to sort of keep everything stylistically in line with where I want it to be, or I'm going to have to move to the lesser known grapes that are still legally and, you know, legally allowed and traditionally grown in my region, that are going to continue to give me that freshness, that acidity that I'm looking for. And this is one of those grapes. So you may not have heard of it, and it's actually very interesting to see it in such a high percentage proportion in this Rioja, because what they're looking to make sure that they're continuing to give you, even as their harvests are getting warmer and warmer, is that they're still giving you freshness, they're still giving you vibrancy. And that's what this grape lends to the wine, which ultimately makes it really important when you're talking about, you know, a pizza that's full of, like, you know, fat and grease and all things delicious. You need that lift to sort of carry it all through. So I think that's one thing that makes this a very interesting and sort of unique style of Rioja.
I want to know what type of pizza Scott's eating. I think he put it in the chat earlier, but we need to know. Inquiring minds.
So I've got a freshly just made it like an hour and a half ago, pepperoni, red onion, crushed tomato with salt, and a mixture of fresh and low moisture mozzarella. The tiniest pinch of oregano, like right when I put it into the oven. And it is singing with that first wine.
Yeah, I feel like the oregano, there's something about Garrigue herbs like lavender, oregano, thyme that work really, really well with that Escalada do Sil. Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like that's one of the more versatile pairings. It's in terms of pizza between these three.
That tastes great.
Yeah. Aaron, what do you have in terms of toppings and pizza?
I'm doing the La Antigua with mushrooms, because I used to live in La Rioja, and I've been going there for about 20 years, and the town I lived in is the mushroom capital of La Rioja. So I'm staying true to my roots, doing mushrooms with that. But it was great with the mushrooms were great with the Escalada as well. Mountain people like mushrooms, so it's been really fun, and I'm excited to taste the next wine, the Caro Tinto. So I'm gonna drop that in the chat so people can
I'm gonna
do that.
Switch up a little while I do that. I guess key takeaways, if you can remember about Rioja, if you haven't tasted it already, is I feel like I like to recommend Rioja to people who like drinking Bordeaux or people who like drinking Cab. It's a great region to explore. And those wines tend to be oaked. We didn't talk about the different types of oak, French versus American, but different types of oak actually impart different flavors. So American oak is one that's commonly found in Spanish wines, especially from Rioja. So this one, sometimes you can smell almost like an herbal dill quality. Coconut and dill tend to really define wines made with aged in American oak. So I don't know if anyone's tasting the Antigua, but if you smell it, I always for me, there's a signature dill smell note component that I get with that wine. But it's very food friendly. Okay, third wine of the night is Caro. So I always try to when I think about wines from these regions, they're often made with grapes that people don't recognize. So this one is made with a grape called Monastrell, which is Mourvedre, if anyone's heard of. It's really common in southern France, and it thrives in really hot climates. It tends to be really earthy and meaty. There's also other grapes blended in, Syrah, Merlot. But what I really love about this wine is there's like a perfect balance between, there's a certain ripeness and jamminess to it, but it's fresh. And so I guess the first point I want to drive home is I'm blocking my move left, right. Again, it's a good thing I didn't have a career as a weather woman. But as you can tell, we're all the way now in the southern part of Spain, and we're right close to the Mediterranean Sea. So it's much warmer. It's a much hotter, drier climate than, say, the Espada de Sil, which was the very first wine we were talking about. So one kind of more general point that I want to drive home for people who are just learning about wine is that the warmer the climate, you're going to end up with wines that have a little bit more of a jammier and more ripe, almost candied fruit profiles. So if you smell, if you smell this wine, you'll notice, I think there's more ripe fruit notes. But what I love about this wine is that it still maintains its freshness. So this wine, even though it's from a relatively warm region in the province of Murcia in southern Spain, it's from a specific region called Yecla and sub-region called Campo Arriba, which is it's a little cooler, it's a little bit higher altitude. And that's kind of a common theme that you've been hearing me talk about. And that's because when you have wines that are from higher altitude in a warm place, it gives it balance. And I think ultimately that's what we all look for in wines, is balance. So to me, this kind of delivers on all cylinders in that it has a really nice, ripe, jammy fruit profile, but it's still fresh. It's still light on its feet. And that's a result of the fact that you're in a warm place. So you have those riper, jammier fruit profile, but it's got that freshness and lightness on its feet on the palate, which I love. This is made by a 4th generation family in southeastern Spain in this region called Campo Arriba. They really believe that the wine is made in the vineyard, and that's kind of an important point that I want to share with you guys, is that there's kind of 2 extremes on the spectrum of winemaking. They're more on the one extreme is natural winemaking, and on the other extreme is a more commercial approach. So really the differences can be summarized in that the more natural approach really believes in the wine in intervening as little as possible in the wine. With the commercial approach, you are producing larger quantities and you want to control the process from start to finish, and you can manipulate the wine to achieve a desired style or goal. And so most fall somewhere in the middle. A lot of the wines that we are tasting today and that we're focusing on tend to be wines that are made in more artisanal style, where they are a little more hands-off. And so this is an example of a winemaker that believes that good wine is made in the vineyard. So for me, I'm curious if anyone else has this wine. Wines from warmer places, generally, back to tying into a bigger picture, stuff that you'll remember and walk away with. If you're having bigger bodied wines, you want to pair them with dishes that are also robust and weighty. So I think about pairing intensity with intensity. So this to me is a wine that, while it's unoaked actually, so it still has that freshness and lightness, but it's a relatively, these grapes that are in this blend are relatively bigger bodied, thicker skinned grapes. So when you're pairing wines, I would think about, like I said, match intensity with intensity. So a wine like this, I think, would go great with roasted or grilled meats, lamb, steak, braised short ribs. So I tasted this wine recently, a couple weeks ago, when I was doing some field research for this tasting, with a pizza that had a pear and gorgonzola. And it just was beautiful. It was such a great pairing. And I think it's because, like I was saying, you want to match intensity with intensity. So if you have a wine with big, bold flavors, you want to pair it with a dish that has big, bold flavors.
Vanessa and Yasmin, we had a question in the comment about the alcohol. So we're curious about that, how that might affect what you do when you pair with food.
Yeah.
This is a little bit higher than the last few. So.
And Vanessa, do you want to touch on that?
Sure. So I would say bravo for considering 1% to being any sort of significant difference, because that's one of the things that we don't maybe think about if we haven't been taught to sort of evaluate wine in a systematic way. When you're looking at the scale, 12% and a little bit lower would be considered low alcohol. 15% and up would be considered high alcohol. So you're talking about a 3% range where we move from low to high, which correlates to light bodied to full bodied, right? So each degree, or percentage point, I should say, matters quite a bit. It takes, not to be too sciencey, but it takes approximately 17 grams per liter of sugar to convert to 1 degree of alcohol. So stylistically, you're talking about a big shift in the wine, and you're also talking about a big shift in the way your body perceives it, absorbs it, and processes it. So, that's why like a bottle of wine, not all bottles of wine are created equal, right? Like you could probably polish a bottle of Muscadet and not think too much about it, and a half bottle of Napa Cab and you'd be on the couch, because those degrees really do make a big difference. This wine has a lot of Monastrell and it has a lot of Syrah, both of which tend to be higher in alcohol, both of which tend to be bigger in body, both of which tend to have a bit more of a tannic structure, like a broader shouldered sort of structure. So I would say, yes, it makes a big difference. Stylistically, it's still in that red fruit vein. It's still in that very sort of like smoky, fresh vein because it's unoaked. So it's not as it maybe would be if they had put oak on this wine. But certainly I would say that this one of the three probably needs the most sort of broad structure to the pizza, if you will. Maybe like if you wanted to go like Sicilian deep dish or Chicago style deep dish on this, you know what I mean? Like something that's got a bit more oomph to it is probably what I would do. Because really when you think about food and wine pairing, and Yasmin sort of touched on this earlier, there's two main camps, right? You have contrasting and you have congruent. And it's really exactly what you would think about, right? Like congruent pairings, they run side by side, right? The flavors and the textures and the intensities, they sort of run in parallel, and both works to sort of highlight the other. Whereas contrasting, they're perpendicular to one another. So an example might be fried chicken and champagne, which is like, an industry we all know that's a classic, right? Because you've got this super high acid with this super greasy food, and so the way they cross each other, it works in a complementary way. So I would say with a wine like this, I would probably lean more towards the congruent than the contrasting side, because you really need a pizza that's going to be as big as the wine. Not as big, as powerful as the wine.
Yeah, like I feel like I would want this with a really like a pizza with short rib on it, or like it needs to have kind of bigger, bolder flavors. So I guess Vanessa, I'm curious on your take. How much do you consider when you're thinking about pizza and wine pairings, like the sauce versus the crust, like deep dish versus thin crust, like some components specific to pizza, or I guess when you're thinking about pizza pairings, what's the first thing that you go to in terms of?
I think about the dough first.
Dough first.
I think about the dough first. Is this like sorry, where I grew up, I'm from Kentucky. I don't know about y'all, but where I grew up, crust literally means just the thing on the very edge of the pizza. And there are crust people and there are not crust people. My mom was a crust person. I was a not crust person growing up. But so crust means something specific. But I know in a more technical sense, crust could maybe be referring to the whole dough of the pizza. But, is it something that is like super thick and dense and sort of chewy? Is it something that's very like light and almost sort of like ethereal in its nature in your mouth, because that intensity is going to sort of lead everything else. Because unless you got like a white pizza, the core sort of flavors and elements are going to be the same, right? You're going to have marinara, you're going to have cheese, maybe you're going to have a vegetable or a protein, but all of these sort of move in a vein that's pretty navigable, right? The biggest sort of variable there is what is the intensity of the dough that everything is resting on. So that's where I would start before moving on to sort of narrow it down.
That's really interesting. And something I didn't think about, because usually I feel like I always think to toppings first or sauce. I underestimate the importance of the crust.
Well, think about a Chicago deep dish pepperoni pizza versus like a Napolitan style pepperoni, just like freshly dusted. You know what I mean? Like it's the same topping, yet it presents so differently in terms of the overall, perception of the pizza.
Totally. Totally.
Intensity matters.
Yeah, I feel like if I could leave everyone with one takeaway when you're thinking about pairing pizza with wine, it's like how intense are the flavors that you're pairing with. If you have a more delicate pizza that's like vegetables or maybe like a light pesto sauce, I don't know, Vanessa, I wouldn't even consider going white, if you had a really delicate, delicate flavors, more vegetable focused.
Yeah, if it was a white pizza or if it was a pizza that was like lighter cheeses and more veggie driven, for sure, I could see like a light crisp white being the way to go. You could stick in Galicia, but maybe go like an Albariño or something instead.
Yeah. And the other thing is like tomato sauce, which is obviously the biggest common denominator in pizza, is pretty acidic. Tomatoes are acidic. So the other takeaway I really want to leave you guys with is like wines that tend to go really well with pizza are wines that have some acidity to them. And oftentimes, funny enough, I feel like I find there are certain wines that tomatoes as a component in food specifically, wines that I don't usually like on their own, sometimes I find work particularly well with tomato sauce. I don't know if that's like that you've experienced the same thing, but anyway, the key takeaways for me, and I want to leave you guys with really are like, think about the intensity of what you're pairing. I feel like that's the most easy to remember, go-to kind of rule of thumb when you're pairing pizza with wine.
We had a question for Vanessa about, some people are having pizza they made at home, some people are having kind of fancy artisanal style, but what about fast food pizza? Domino's, Pizza Hut, what do you need to look for in a wine to make that seriously work?
Well, I think it's like you have to kind of think about like fast food pizzas are kind of like steakhouses, right? Like if I was going to make the correlation, like Peter Luger's would be like Papa John's, if anybody knows. So it's like they drown everything in butter. You know what I mean? It's like each of the fast food pizzas, like they've got a signature style for their pizza. And so I would sort of look at it not from, because, let's be honest, when it comes to cookie cutter sort of pizza, like, the ingredients are only going to matter so much. It's more about like the core identity of what the fast food chain is like invested in and, what they're replicating. So I would think about like, what is, some people love Domino's, some people love Pizza Hut, some people love Papa John's, whatever it is. Pick the one that you like that style and figure out how to mirror that in your pizza. So, it comes down to the intensity, it comes down to the flavor profile, the type of dough, the type of sauce. Some tend to have sweeter sauces. Like for me, the Domino's sauce is a bit more savory. The Pizza Hut sauce is a bit more sweet. Pizza Hut, I don't know if they still do. I should actually, that's a good question. I should find out. Are they still doing the cheese stuffed crust?
I sure hope so.
For that.
You definitely are.
That sounds so good right now. I'm out in Montauk. If you guys don't know where that is, it's like at the end of the universe. There's nothing out here. A cheese stuffed crust pizza from Pizza Hut sounds so good.
Based on chat discussion, it seems like one of the questions the polls we should have asked Erin is pineapple or no pineapple.
Fold versus no fold.
Well, I did just launch a poll about favorite style, so that makes sense. And I am, as the timekeeper, gonna let everybody know we're gonna, of course, say thank you and for everyone for being here, and we'll hang out for a little while longer. But we want to remind everybody who's joined us tonight about a couple things. So first of all, we want to thank Vanessa and Scott, our guests and intrepid hosts, telling us all of these amazing things. And Yasmin for leading us through the wines and getting us to finally do pizza night. It's been really fun. We want to also make sure that everyone who's on this call knows we do this every month. And every month we raise money for a different cause. So next month we're going to be talking about conservas and coastal wine with some really good friends of ours from Barcelona, Barcelona Wine Bar, who just launched a new company called Conserva. So please join us for that. In March, we'll be doing Spanish Wine and Cheese 101 with our friends from Despania, who bring in gorgeous foods and also sell wine. They're based in New York, but they can send cheese anywhere across the country. So that's something to think about. Vanessa's insights have been incredible. I mean, just looking at the nerve endings, you know, the moving diagram was so cool, and we're going to drop a link in just a sec so that you can get her book sent to your door and start having fun in this long winter with all kinds of pairings, maybe new pairings to you, with wine and with different foods that might be a little bit surprising. And we're so glad that you've been here to tell us about that. And also, we want to say, donate more money to Slice Out Hunger. As Scott mentioned, this is an ongoing need. And when you donate to Slice Out Hunger, when you buy a ticket to this event, you are not only sending pizza to hungry frontline medical workers, but you're also supporting businesses who make pizza. So you get a double effect, which is so important. So you're going to see an email from us after the session concludes with reminders about where you can buy Big Macs and Burgundy, how you can support Slice Out Hunger more, and of course, how you can sign up for our sessions that are ongoing every month. So we hope you can do all of those things, and thank you very much. We did promise that there would be some pizza talk, so you can stick around and hang out and ask questions, and anything, of course, that Vanessa and Scott want to say, you're welcome to. We're gonna probably stop recording the session as it ends, but we want to thank you from all of us at Ole Obrigado, and cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm hanging out if anyone wants to stay behind.
So I will say, I saw a question from Beth, which I just loved so much. She was asking about cauliflower pizza. I have a chapter in the book that I do with popular foods from Trader Joe's. And you want to know how I determined that? I literally walked into a Trader Joe's. They're like the best humans on planet Earth. There's a reason I'm obsessed with them. And I was like, hi, I'm writing a book. What are your most popular foods? And the manager was like, no problem. And went in the back and like printed out like, this is everything we sell nationally and at this store and blah, blah, blah. They just like handed over the information, where I feel like at Whole Foods, they'd be like security. But I actually did with that one. My goal with the book was, it's over 300 food and wine pairings, and I did not want to repeat a wine, but I wanted all of the wine and foods to be legitimate. I didn't want it to just be for shock value or, you know, just to be weird or whatever. So it had to make sense. But, you know, obviously when you're going that high on the list, you've got to start to go beyond, you know, the classic areas. So with that one, I actually did a Fetiasca Regala, which is a very perfumed, aromatic, fuller bodied white wine from Romania, which I thought went really, really well with cauliflower crust. So
bold.
Not the easiest to find, but
Yeah.
there are some retailers across the US carrying it. And I do, for every pairing in the book, I give suggestions of producers at 3 different price points. So, you know, try to point you in the right direction without just saying some wild wine and then saying good luck. So that was a good question. Thanks, Beth.
Perfect. Scott, I think you need to respond to the pineapple thing.
I was prepared for this. It seems like there is some support in the chat for pineapple, and I mean, so the question was posed: is pineapple okay on pizza? I know some people are worried that it's not on pizza in Italy, so it's not okay. Oh, it's a fruit. Oh, it's really acidic. And my response to that is, first of all, forget the it's not in Italy thing, because pepperoni is not on Italian pizzas, and we do all kinds of stuff on pizza that's not in Italian pizzas. You got to step backwards for a second and remember that the pizza is not defined by its toppings. It's defined by its base. So a dough that's stretched and topped and baked is a pizza. Doesn't matter what you put on it, still a pizza. But if you think about a pizza as sauce, cheese, crust, plus stuff, that's where I want to hold back. To go back to what you're talking about with the idea of complementary wines, or you know, like dealing with the parallel versus the perpendicular, a pizza that has an acidic tomato and then an acidic pineapple, maybe an overload. So I would love a pineapple on a white pizza and maybe char the pineapple and like knock down the acidity, bring up bring up some of the sweetness, and then pair it with really fatty pork, with heat, like jalapeno, with maybe accentuate the sweet with something like honey or maybe a delicious sweet wine pairing. I mean, I think there's absolutely no problem. It is absolutely pizza, and it can taste good if you open your heart to it. But if you close it out, then I feel like you're the one who will suffer.
Vanessa, we've got a question on how do we pair wine with pineapple on pizza? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the answer to that is probably, you know, the also the crux of the issue, right? Like what people would argue, unless you're taking the argument of origin, the argument is it just overpowers everything else, right? So if you're going to put pineapple on your pizza, which, you know, I really happen to agree with Scott, you know, it's the same with wine. It's like whatever floats your boat, you know, well, life is tough enough, man. So I am not trying to judge your wine or your pizza choices. So if you're deciding to go with pineapple on your pizza, I would say that you've got to move to a wine that has more tropical fruit character, depending upon whether you like red wine or white wine. You've got to sort of keep it in that vein. And you tend to find the more tropical fruit characters in white wines from warmer regions, but you can find it in red wines as well. So, you know, if we're talking about Spain, I would be talking about, you know, wines coming from the southern part of Spain, where they get riper and they get rounder and they get bigger, but they still maintain some sort of acidity, because that's what makes pineapple so unique, is that it is so ripe and full of sugar, but it's also still so acidic. But if you wanted to be super crazy, which I'm always all for, one thing that is not very well known about the United States is that all 50 states produce wine, and the main wine produced in Hawaii is actually pineapple wine. So there's a lot of meh producers. There's a few producers that are putting out some decent stuff, but I would say this is a very, very good example of like with like, and I'd probably maybe put some Hawaiian pineapple wine with my pineapple pizza.
I'm into it. I'm trying to think of if like I feel like you need a wine that has that has some prominent tropical fruit or bold notes. Even
or
like
you know what, you could also just do like a classic Vino Verde, right? Something that's just like fresh and simple and easy. It's got a little bit of like that tingly sort of effervescence to it, but not quite, you know, not quite frisant. That just sort of like acts as sort of like a conduit for the pineapple pizza, you know? So it's not competing against, it's just sort of like what was your slip and slide earlier? It can kind of be like that.
Scott, we got a question about toppings above the cheese or below.
Great question. Amazing. So this was brought up earlier, and in the vein of Vanessa's book, I want to mention like Papa John's does something where they call it the cheese lock. So they put the cheese on top of all the other toppings, and they do that because they're a delivery company, and the cheese on top holds the toppings together so that the pizza doesn't look like a disaster when it arrives at your house. So it's a functional thing. I personally really like to construct my pizzas cheese first, then toppings, and then I finish with sauce. This way, when I take a bite, the cheese doesn't slide off the slick tomato topping. It adheres to the crust, and then I get the bright fruit of the tomato on the roof of my mouth. So I actually really like going wacky: crust, cheese, toppings, sauce.
The other question was your go-to fast food pizza.
It's a tough one because I don't get to eat a lot of fast food pizza because my life is consumed by going to New York pizzerias and making my own. But I will say this, the square pizza at Little Caesars is probably the most successful, like well-executed pizza of all of them, because somebody mentioned Detroit style in the chat, and Little Caesars from Detroit, their square deep dish, they call it, it's a decent Detroit pizza. And I think that's the last fast food pizza I had where I ate more than one slice, and on purpose.
Deep dish, thoughts on deep dish?
Yeah, a couple people are they're angry. They're angry in the chat. They're saying, defend this. And I will defend this. I'm happy to. You have to go back to the origin of pizza to understand deep dish. So at the origin of pizza in Naples, late 1700s, pizza was just dough with something on it and then baked. But that word was used to describe other things 600 years before that that were really just like cookies and cakes. So the common line, the common thread with pizza is that it's a flour-based bready product that's baked. So if you go from Neapolitan pizza and make the leap from that to New York style or to New Haven or to Sicilian pizza, I don't think that that leap is any different from the leap from New York style to deep dish, because the only real big difference is the dough has a higher fat content, the flour has a lower protein content, and it's baked in a pan instead of being baked in a directly on the hearth of the oven. So if you divide all of pizza into two variations, hearth baked, meaning Neapolitan, New York style, New Haven, and then pan baked, meaning grandma pizza, New Haven, not New, Detroit style, all those, then I feel like it makes a ton of sense, because Chicago is in the Midwest. The Midwest has a lot of winter wheat, which is low protein flour. And it only makes a ton of sense that that's the style of pizza that became popular, not like in New York, where we're a city of foot traffic, where a high protein wheat that's native to New York State, heavy foot traffic of New York City equals a thin, flat, portable, foldable, huggable, lovable slice. They're both pizza. They're both valid. If you don't like deep dish, again, that's totally fine by me.
Oh, one more question we have. I'm sorry, I have a dog barking in the background. I'm trying to mute myself. Top 3 favorite pizzerias in New York. And Lada says if you don't say Lucali's, she won't tattletale on you.
Okay, good. Yeah, Mark wouldn't be, he wouldn't care. Well, let me ask you this, and I'm asking the chat, anybody, whatever. Can you narrow it down to either a borough or a style, maybe? Because it's pretty hard to narrow it down to 3 when there's all these different styles.
We're getting Brooklyn from Craig.
Okay, cool. Okay, in Brooklyn, there's and I'm gonna tell you places that I'm like in love with. Lucali is definitely one of them. L'Industrie in Williamsburg is definitely one of them. Super phenomenal. And for my third, and I'm trying to switch styles a little bit. For my third, Totonno's in Coney Island. The best white pizza I've ever had. They put cheese first, sauce last, so I love that. And this way you get to go to Coney Island. I see a question also about the water source. I want to quickly put that to bed. The New York water is not what makes New York pizza good, because I'm sorry to say it, but there's a lot of bad pizzerias in New York that use the same water. No, it's the good pizza is made by good people. It's like saying that the wine is only good because the grapes are good. That's saying that like the people who work at the vineyard and the winery don't have any skill. It's all the grape. That's not true. You know that. And then I just saw another question that came up about the New Haven pizzerias. My favorite is not one of the super famous ones, and it's actually in West Haven. It's called Zupardi's. My favorite clam pizza I've ever had. An incredible sausage pizza run by the same family that opened it in 1930 when it was a bread bakery. Totally phenomenal.
Vanessa, what are your favorites in New York, or at least in New York, not at Montauk?
Or Montauk, I want to hear that.
Well, so actually it's funny, the way it works out here in the off season for any folks that aren't in New York, Montauk is part of the Hamptons, and it's called Montauk, the end of the world, because it really is the end of the world. And this time of year, it's so isolated. The population at the height of summer is like 55,000, and the population this time of year is about 4,500. So everybody's gone. So that being said, like the pizza you can get night by night kind of varies depending upon what's open. And actually my favorite pizza is a place called Best Pizza. But it's delicious, right? Oh, I feel legitimized that the pizza expert is agreeing with me.
I was hoping, I was like, she's got to say Best Pizza.
Yeah, Best Pizza. I mean, I remember when it first came and I was like, what a name, what a bunch of chumps. And then I tried it and I was like, whoa, that's some good pizza. So I'd have to say Best Pizza, but their wait times were not accommodating to this Zoom tonight. So I got it from a place called Village Pizza, which is kind of like the drunkard's pizza place at 2 a.m, which is fine. It's, it's fine. But in the city, I guess I would have to say hands down, no, don't at me, don't argue with me. It would be Pasquale Jones on Mulberry and Kinmare. I cannot get enough of that pizza, and I miss being in the city so much because it's 2 blocks from my apartment.
Incredible clam pizza there.
Yeah.
I had a really a pizza revelation, if you will, recently. I love pizza very much. I'm wearing a pizza shirt that says, "I just want pizza. Pizza understands me." I don't know if you can see it on the but it was from Mama's Too, which has been raved about plenty in New York City. It's in I want to say it's in Harlem, and I've been wanting to try it for a while. I ordered 3 pizzas for pizza research for this event, actually, to take home. And while I was waiting, I ordered, I got a couple individual pieces to taste. And I will say, Scott, I don't know if you, I mean, I'm sure you've had Mama's Too, but I want to say it was the best pizza I've ever had. The sad thing is, I took it home and it wasn't so great traveling. And my husband, who may or may not still be on this call, this is like the source of marital conflict right now, that he thinks it was really disappointing. And I thought it was the best pizza I've ever had. So I don't know if anyone else has had Mama's Too, but I have strong feelings about eating Mama's Too fresh. That was the best pizza I've ever had.
Mama's Too, they bake some slice shops slightly underbake their pizzas, anticipating the reheat. Mama's Too doesn't. They fully bake the pizza. So that's why it's best right when you get it, exactly the way you did it. And putting it in a box or getting it reheated, I think takes it past its prime.
It was bad. It wasn't. Jen, great insider tip. Clearly, clearly this ain't your first rodeo. Heating up in a cast iron and then the oven. Oh, you know what, Scott? I'm interested. Do you have any tips on reheating pizza, just generally? I've heard different things, so I'm curious what your kind of your advice is on reheating.
I feel like listen to Jennifer, because I'm glad that she's railing against the microwave. Definitely, microwave's the worst. I think oven is second worst. Reheating on a pizza stone is a bad idea. Don't even do it. It's unnecessary. For me, I think actually I don't use a cast iron. I'd rather use like a super cheap frying pan, like non-stick or anything. Because the cast iron takes too long to heat up and it's not going to heat up super evenly on the stove. So what I do is, if I'm going for it, slice in the pan, maximum heat, and then about 2 minutes later, drop the heat down to medium, low, a drop of water in it, and then put the lid on so it steams a little bit. Or I'm super lazy, start it face down, cheese down.
What?
Yup, medium. Yup. And then when it starts to loosen a little bit, flip it, and then this way you don't have to clean the lid. You only have to wash one thing. That's what I'm saying.
Interesting.
But I will introduce one more element. Frying pan is definitely the best, but I recently started using this, what do you call this thing? Toaster oven situation. It has an air fry setting, and if I set it to that, then by the time it's preheated, the slice is reheated properly. So I'm into that.
These are all invaluable insider tips.
Yeah, I don't want to clean the lid. Thank you, Nicholas.
I guess unless anyone has any other questions, I feel like I'm glad we've gotten like a great second win on pizza interest here. I feel like that's indicative of another follow-on, Scott, maybe we need to do.
I'm always ready to talk pizza. And as I think you've mentioned before, I have classes on my website where I do pizza history. I do virtual tours of pizzerias, pizza making classes on the weekends, pizza dough making classes, tons of stuff all the time. And I love questions like this. So really, if there's something that's been on your mind, now's the moment, please.
Well, I'm so glad. I feel like if I had for me, what gives me the most joy is giving a platform and voice to people who are really passionate. And I feel like that's what this room is full of, people who are really passionate about something, whether it's pizza or wine. And not only that, but like leveraging it for something great. So chapeau to you, Scott, for the work that you've done. And we're really proud to support you and partner with you on this.
No,
And it
thank-
was really the perfect fit. We want to do something for a good cause, and pizza is a passion of mine personally. And I'm glad we were able to combine all three things into one. So cheers. And thank you all so much for joining and tuning in. If you guys have any follow-up questions or just like want to know anything about pizza or wine, reach out to us and feel free to use this as a resource. Aaron, if you have any other kind of closing remarks, otherwise.
You'll see a follow-up email from us. So thank you for being here, and just reminding you where you can donate more and grab Vanessa's book and keep learning about all these fun pairings. And we hope to see you again next month. Thank you.
Cheers, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all for teaching us.
Bye, Craig.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
everyone. Bye, everyone. Bye, Patrick.
Thank
Hey,
you,
Drew.
Yasmin. Bye-bye.
Bye, Craig.
Thanks.
Bye, Mike.
Good seeing you.
Jen, thank you guys. Hi, Amy. And Sam.
Hey, thanks, Yaz.